Growing up was tough, with Dad always on my back. Mom passed away when I was little, so it was just the two of us, and Dad took the whole single parenting gig to another level. He had rules for everything. No hanging out with the kids who liked to race cars, no wild hair colors, and studying had to be my top priority. "Jenna, those kids are trouble, you hear me? Stay away from them," Dad would warn me, his voice stern, whenever he saw me chatting with the neighborhood thrill seekers. "But Dad, they're just having fun. We're not kids anymore." I'd shoot back, trying to stand my ground. "It ain't about age, it's about making smart choices. And dyeing your hair like a traffic light ain't smart," he'd say, squinting his eyes as if he could scare the rebellion out of me. I wasn't having any of it. "Maybe I want to stand out," I'd retort, my voice just as firm. Dad wasn't just a stickler at home. He had a reputation around town too, always preaching about responsibility and hard work. He meant well, but to me, it felt suffocating. Every time we clashed, which was often, I'd pack a bag and storm over to Aunt Marie's place. She was Dad's younger sister, lived a few blocks away, and was the exact opposite of him, easygoing and always with a smile. "Aunt Marie, why can't he just chill out? It's like he's stuck in some ancient times," I'd complain as soon as I dropped onto her couch. She'd chuckle, handing me a soda, before sitting down next to me. "Jenna, your dad's just scared. He lost your mom, and he's afraid of losing you too. But he sees the world his way, black and white. But that's just it. I'm not him. I need some color in my life, you know?" I'd say, popping the can open. Marie would nod, her expression softening. "He does go overboard. But he's not wrong about everything. Give it time, you'll see some of his points." That was Aunt Marie, always trying to bridge the gap between Dad and me. But back then, I couldn't see it. All I knew was that I wanted out. So, as soon as high school was over, I grabbed my chance. Thanks to my grades, I landed a scholarship and went off to college, leaving my hometown, and Dad, behind. College was freedom. For the first time, I made my own decisions without anyone looming over me. I dyed my hair purple, stayed out late, and, yes, even got involved with a group that loved street racing. But I kept my head in the books. I wasn't about to waste the scholarship or the opportunities one had fought so hard for. After 4 years of hard work and a fair share of fun, I graduated with a degree in accounting and a job offer from a respected firm in the city. My boss, Mr. Thompson, was a tough guy but fair, much like Dad and his expectations, but without the personal judgment. When I met Mike, it felt like hitting the jackpot. It was at a casual hangout with some friends from work. He was there with a buddy who knew one of my colleagues. Mike had that easy charm, a quick smile, and an infectious laugh that pulled you right in. We got talking, and it turned out we had a ton in common, both mad about classic rock, both foodies, and both into old movies. "Ever seen Casablanca?" he asked, eyes lighting up as he took a sip of his beer. "Are you kidding? Here's looking at you, kid," is my go-to toast. I laughed, thrilled to meet someone who shared my quirky interests. We hit it off immediately, and before long, we were inseparable. Dating Mike was a whirlwind of dinner dates, movie nights, and lazy weekends just lounging around. 6 months later, we were married. It felt right, like everything was falling into place. The first year was bliss. We talked about everything, made decisions together, shared our dreams and our bank accounts. I felt like I finally had the partnership I craved, equal, open, just perfect. But then, things started to change. It began subtly. One night, as I was getting ready to meet some friends for drinks after work, Mike frowned. "You're going out again? You know, you've been kinda busy lately," he said, his tone more accusing than curious. "Just catching up with the gang. It's been ages." I replied, trying to keep the mood light. "Yeah, but maybe you should chill on the outings. We could use some us time," he insisted, not really asking but telling. I paused, a bit thrown off. "Sure, we can plan something for the weekend?" It didn't stop there. Mike's suggestions became rules. He started expressing his concerns about the time I spent with my friends and even my workmates. Then came the big ask. One evening, Mike was going through our finances, a spreadsheet open on his laptop, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Babe, I've been thinking," he started, not looking up from the screen. "It would make more sense if I managed our finances. Just hand over your account details." I hesitated, surprised. "What? Why? I've been handling my finances since forever. It's just easier this way. I can keep track of our spending and savings. Plus, it's what a husband does, right?" he said, finally looking up at me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I felt a chill, but nodded, unsure. "Okay, if you think it's best." From then on, Mike took control. He decided where we went, what we did on weekends, and how we spent our money. If I suggested something different, he'd shoot it down. "No, that's not a good idea," he'd dismiss without discussion. As months passed, I found myself fading into the background of my own life. My friends stopped calling so much, knowing I'd likely say no. My world shrank to what Mike approved, and the vibrant, independent woman I once was began to disappear. I didn't even recognize myself anymore. Living near Mike and his parents seemed ideal at first, like having a close-knit family just next door. But reality bit hard and fast. His mom, Nancy, was a sweet talker with a controlling twist, and his dad, Frank, was just as invasive, treating our place like it was his own. One chilly evening, I was just getting home from a long day at work, my mind on the 1,000 things I still had to do, when Nancy called. Her voice was sugary sweet at first. "Jenna, darling, have you started dinner yet? Mike must be starving after his hard day," she cooed over the phone. "Actually, Nancy, I just walked in. Dinner's gonna be a bit late tonight," I replied, trying not to let my frustration show. Her tone flipped cold as ice. "Well, I hope Mike doesn't have to wait too long. A man needs his dinner on time, you know." It wasn't just the dinner comments. Nancy believed Mike should be pampered because his job was supposedly more demanding, despite us both working full-time. Her idea of fairness was skewed wildly in her son's favor. I was expected to handle everything else, cooking, cleaning, and then some. It didn't stop at our home either. Nancy had me over at their place regularly, pushing a broom or a mop into my hands the moment I stepped through the door. And Frank? He was no better. Weekends were his domain apparently. He'd show up at our house first thing Saturday morning, remote in hand, ready to take over the living room. The TV volume cranked so high it made the windows rattle. He'd settle in like a king. "Jenna, where's the beer? I thought you'd have stocked up for the weekend," Frank would bellow from his makeshift throne. "It's in the fridge, Frank," I'd call out, trying to hide my annoyance. Frank would grumble something under his breath about kids these days as he raided the refrigerator, leaving a trail of crumbs and empty bottles in his wake. Mike never said a word against it, always shrugging off my complaints. It was exhausting. Between my job, keeping our home, and catering to the whims of my in-laws, I was stretched thin. I began to lose pieces of myself, my time, and my sanity to their endless demands. Things at work took a sharp turn when my company decided to absorb a smaller firm. The accounting department there was a mess, a tangled web of inaccuracies and outdated systems. It fell on me to sort it all out, which meant long hours and even more stress. Coming home late became the norm rather than the exception. One particularly grueling evening, I got home to find Mike lounging on the sofa, flipping through channels, the dinner table untouched and empty. "Where's dinner? You know I get hungry after work," he complained without even looking my way. I dropped my bag, my patience worn thin. "Mike, you know what's been going on at work. You were here first, why couldn't you have made something?" He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that filled the room. "Me, cook dinner? That's women's work, Jenna. I'm not about to start playing house husband." I felt a surge of anger. We agreed, before we got married, there'd be no men's or women's jobs. "We're supposed to be in this together," I shot back, my voice rising. Mike's face darkened, and he stood up abruptly. "I don't have time for this nonsense," he snapped, grabbing his keys off the counter. "Where are you going?" I demanded, but he was already heading for the door. "Out. Away from this." He threw over his shoulder, and then he was gone. He disappeared for days. No calls, no texts, just silence. I was left alone, wrestling with my escalating workload and the crumbling facade of my marriage. When he finally came back, he acted as if nothing had happened, ignoring the strain and tension between us. Around that time, I received some good news at work. My efforts hadn't gone unnoticed, and I was promoted with a significant salary increase. I was over the moon, until I shared it with Mike. "That's great, babe," he said, a too quick smile flashing across his face. "Guess what? I'll quit in a week. No point in working now that you're making enough for both of us." I stared at him, stunned. "What? Mike, we need to discuss this together?" He shrugged, completely unconcerned. "You're making plenty. I can finally relax a bit." The next day, I went to work early, the weight of my thoughts heavier than ever. I stayed late again, my mind buzzing with figures and files, but also with a growing resolve. When I finally got home, Mike was waiting, his expression sour. "You're late again. Where's dinner?" He started in immediately. I took a deep breath, my decision clear in my mind. "Mike, we need to talk. This isn't working. I can't be the only one trying here." He scoffed, crossing his arms. "So what are you saying? You want a medal for working hard? Come off it, Jenna." "No, I want a partner. Someone who stands with me, not on me," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. Mike looked at me, really looked, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of understanding. But then it was gone, replaced by the stubborn set of his jaw. "If you can't handle this, maybe you shouldn't have taken that promotion," he retorted coldly. Then he grabbed his jacket and slammed the door behind him. 9 months had slipped by, months where I found myself trapped in a life I never envisioned. Mike never went back to work. Instead, he filled his days meeting with friends and often stumbled home late, reeking of booze. Each time I dared to question him, he'd explode in anger, retreating to the sanctity of his parents' home where he was still treated like a child rather than a grown man. "You're being too hard on him, Jenna. You should be supporting your husband, not tearing him down." Nancy, his mother, would screech over the phone whenever he ran off to them. "I'm supporting the whole family, Nancy. What more do you want from me?" I'd shoot back, my patience worn to nothing. It wasn't just supporting Mike, his parents had grown dependent on me too. Small amounts of money were frequently requested, money for groceries, money for bills. It seemed their hands were always outstretched, waiting for me to fill them. Her only response was to hang up, leaving me fuming and helpless. One day, amidst this ongoing storm, I received a call that shattered the uneasy calm. Aunt Marie's voice was soft but strained as she relayed the news of Dad's passing. My world stopped. The last time we spoke, we had argued, silly things, youthful pride clashing with his rigid ways. I never got the chance to make peace. "Can you come with me to the funeral?" I asked Mike, a desperate plea for some semblance of support. He barely glanced up from the TV. "Nah, I can't handle funerals. You go handle it," he muttered, dismissing my need with a wave of his hand. So, I went alone. The funeral was a blur, faces of family and friends I hadn't seen in years, all mourning the man who raised me alone. But it was after, while sitting in Dad's lawyer's office, that reality hit hard. Dad had left me everything, his house and savings, a total of $250,000. Tears streamed down my face as I realized, despite our differences, Dad had been preparing me for a future, perhaps knowing I'd need a way out someday. That night, in the quiet of my childhood home, I thumbed through old photo albums. Pictures of me in rebellious outfits, with bright hair and brighter smiles, all screamed of a girl who dreamed of freedom. I had traded those dreams for security, only to end up more caged than ever. As dawn broke, clarity came with it. It was time for a change, a big one. The money and the house, it wasn't just an inheritance, it was my ticket to a new life, a chance to rediscover the fierce girl who once believed she could conquer the world. I need to do this, not just for me, but for the woman Dad believed I could be, I whispered to myself, a vow in the still morning air. When I walked through the door of what used to be our shared home, the air was thick with expectation. Mike and his parents were already waiting, like vultures perched for the kill. Their eyes lit up with a mix of greed and curiosity as they spotted me. "So, Jenna, how much did old Hal leave you?" Mike asked, his voice dripping with feigned concern. I hesitated, clutching the documents a little tighter. Before I could reply, Mike snatched the papers right from my hands. As he scanned the figures, a triumphant grin spread across his face. $250,000, he exclaimed, turning to his parents, who immediately began to buzz with excitement. His mother, Nancy, clapped her hands together. "Oh, that will cover a lovely vacation for us all. How about Italy? Or maybe a cruise?" Frank was already nodding in agreement. "And we need new furniture. Something nice, something grand," he chimed in. Mike, not to be outdone in the dreaming, banged his fist on the table. "It's settled then. I'm getting a new car. It's about time I rode in style." I stood there, stunned into silence for a moment, as they carried on, planning as if I wasn't even in the room. Gathering my courage, I finally spoke up. "Listen up, all of you. This is my inheritance, not yours. I decide how it's spent, not you," I said, my voice firm, louder than I felt. Mike whirled on me, his face twisted in anger. "You think you're in charge here? Keep talking like that, and I'll divorce you so fast it'll make your head spin." His threat hung in the air, but before I could respond, Nancy grabbed me by the shoulders and shoved me towards the door. "Think about how you're acting, Jenna. You're too arrogant. Maybe a night outside will cool you off," she hissed, her voice venomous. I stumbled out the door, the shock of the physical and emotional assault numbing my senses. For a moment, I stood there, bewildered by the audacity of their entitlement. But then, almost unexpectedly, a laugh bubbled up from within me. It started small, but grew in volume, echoing into the quiet street. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a strange, exhilarating freedom. With nowhere else to go, I drove back to my father's house. The familiar walls welcomed me like an old friend. That night, the reality of my situation began to sink in, and a plan started to form. First thing in the morning, I picked up the phone and dialed my office. "Hey, it's Jenna. I need to ask for a couple of weeks off, personal leave. I've got some things to sort out," I explained when my boss, Mr. Thompson, answered. "Jenna, take all the time you need. I've noticed you've been off your game a bit lately. Whatever it is, sort it out. We'll manage here," Mr. Thompson replied, his voice kind and understanding. "Thanks, Mr. T. I appreciate it more than you know," I said, grateful for his support. Hanging up, I felt the first real peace in a long while. The next steps were clear. I needed to legally separate myself and my finances from Mike and his parasitic hold on my life. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to fight back. I was sipping coffee from Dad's favorite mug, enjoying the quiet of the morning, when my phone began to buzz relentlessly on the kitchen counter. At first, I ignored it, savoring the peace and the slight amusement at the thought that Mike and his parents were probably scheming about my inheritance. But the phone wouldn't stop, it was like it had a life of its own. Finally, I picked up, bracing myself for the onslaught. "What is it, Mike?" I snapped, not in the mood for niceties. "Jenna, you need to give us access to the money. I can't get into the account." His voice was a mix of frustration and panic. I couldn't help but laugh, the sound sharp and clear. "That's because I've restricted access, Mike. You can't use my money anymore," I said, enjoying the moment of revelation. There was a pause, a silence filled with his disbelief. "You can't do that. We're married." "Not for long," I replied curtly and hung up. That should have been the end of it, but of course, it wasn't. That evening, just as I was settling down with a book, I heard the familiar sound of a car pulling up outside. Mike and his parents came storming up to the front door, their faces twisted with anger and desperation. They didn't even wait for me to invite them in. Nancy pushed past the doorway, her voice shrill. "You think you're clever, huh? Cutting us off like that?" Frank followed, his brow furrowed. "You're supposed to share what you have with your family." Mike was the last to enter, his expression one of betrayed fury. "This is about us, Jenna. You're ruining everything." I stood my ground, feeling more secure in my decision than ever. "This is not about us, Mike. This never was. It's always been about what you could get from me." His face contorted with anger. "Well, guess what? We're getting a divorce." That's when I handed him the divorce papers, neatly prepared and waiting for this moment. The surprise on his face was almost comical. "What's this?" "Your freedom," I said dryly. "Sign them and you're free to leave." He scanned the documents quickly, a greedy spark lighting up his eyes as he signed. "Fine. But remember, I get half, $125,000. That'll adjust our plans, but it's something." Nancy muttered under her breath. "Should have been the full $250,000. Getting a piece of wool from a black sheep, aren't we?" I couldn't hold back a laugh. "Actually, you're getting nothing. Inheritance isn't divided in a divorce here. Not a cent of that money is yours." The color drained from their faces. Mike's hands shook as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. "But we've already spent anticipating that money. We went on vacation, bought things on credit." His voice faded as the reality of their financial blunder hit him. Nancy's eyes were wide with fear, and Frank looked like he was about to collapse. "This isn't my problem. You made your choices," I said, my voice cold but steady. "Now, if you don't leave, I'll call the police." The threat was enough. They stumbled out, a mix of shock and anger marking their defeat. As the door closed behind them, a profound sense of relief washed over me. They were out of my life, finally and completely. Selling Dad's house was tough, like closing the final chapter of my old life. I felt every pang of regret as I handed over the keys, but I knew it was the right move. With that money, I bought a new place right next to my work, a cozy little house that was all mine, no strings attached. At work, things were looking up too. Mr. Thompson had been watching my progress closely, and one afternoon, he called me into his office. The sun streamed through the blinds, casting lines across his face as he looked up from his papers. "Jenna, you've been pulling in some impressive numbers, and your leadership hasn't gone unnoticed," he started, his tone serious but warm. I stood there, hands clasped in front of me, waiting. "I want to offer you the position of deputy director. You've earned it," he said, his eyes steady on mine. "Thank you, Mr. T. I won't let you down," I replied, a mix of pride and excitement swelling in my chest. It felt good, really good, to be recognized for my hard work and not just seen as a bank account or a maid. Meanwhile, Mike and his parents' situation had taken a nosedive. They were buried in debt after their reckless spending spree, hiding from creditors who weren't too pleased about unpaid bills. They had to sell their house, but even that wasn't enough to cover their debts. Last I heard, they were cramped in a small rented apartment, all of them working odd jobs, just to make ends meet. One evening, my phone rang, and Mike's name flashed on the screen. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "Jenna, listen, I've been thinking a lot," he started, his voice shaky. "I made a mistake. A big one. I want to make things right. Maybe start over?" I couldn't help but laugh, not a joyful laugh, but one tinged with disbelief. "Start over? Mike, do you even hear yourself?" I know it sounds crazy, but I've changed, Jenna," he insisted, desperation clear in his voice. "Changed? Mike, you only call when you're out of money or options. You don't need a restart. You need a reality check," I shot back, my patience thin. And with that, I hung up. I realized then that I was truly free, not just from Mike, but from the hold his family had on me, from the life I was forced into. Now, I really understand what Dad tried to teach me all those years. He knew the value of standing on your own, of making tough decisions for the sake of your future. I only wish I could tell him he was right, share a moment of reconciliation.